Bună ziua și bun găsit la o nouă zi a interviurilor Teatrul Azi la Festivalul Shakespeare din Craiova. Este penultima zi de interviuri și mă bucur să o debutez alături de invitații mei, Cecilia Tăutu van Velzen și Matthew Schwartz. Did I still pronounce that right?
That was great, yeah.
I'm gonna very quickly turn back to Romanian to introduce you to the people watching. Cecilia Tăutu van Velzen semnează regia și sound design-ul spectacolului Ioric sau Craniul, în timp ce Matthew Schwartz este performerul producției. În această ipostază se întâlnesc și în ipostaza de coautori ai textului. Și spectacolul pe care îl aduc în Festivalul Shakespeare în această ediție, Ioric sau Craniul, este o producție Glinslift, compania lor de teatru din Marea Britanie. Spectacolul urmează să aibă loc astăzi, 29 mai, de la ora 18 la Ramada Plaza. And now to start off our interview, thank you so much for accepting our invitation to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Of course. I'm very curious about your protagonist. So you picked a dead character who doesn't even show up in the original Shakespearean play to be your main focus. I'm wondering why?
Do you want to start? Yeah, sure. I think first and foremost what we thought was really interesting is that Hamlet, even though there's only 10 lines about Yorick as a character, describes him quite fondly. And there is not another jester at Elsinore when Hamlet is in his own play. So as people that work in the arts, and specifically in sort of more theatre-related arts, it was really interesting to us that there appeared to have happened a sort of censorship between Hamlet's youth and now, and we thought it would be a really interesting exploration of what Elsinore was before and what part Yorick might have played in that, especially in a world where art is perhaps once again becoming slightly more pivotal in sharing truth with power. And I think we also just enjoyed the fact that we could bring something to life that existed in a universe that people knew, but we could infuse with our own thoughts and ideas a lot more freely.
There's also something fascinating when you think of Shakespeare, or even when you think of theatre in general. Lots of people go to the image of Hamlet looking at this skull. It's like one of the most familiar images we have. And it was very strange to us that nobody knew who that skull actually was. And I think there's something about looking beyond what we already know about Shakespeare, but using our own imagination to add to his work, whilst informing it with research, because we've really tried to dive deep into the leftovers that Shakespeare provided us with, and also go into what scholars have described as his sources for Hamlet to track down lineage and where Elsinore might have come from, to have an informed view of what that story might have been like. I think sharing lost stories in general is something as a company we're interested in.
Yeah.
Look beyond what we know, I suppose.
You're playing with a lot of unexplored elements of Hamlet, which is the dynamic between the two brothers, Hamlet and Claudius. The era of Hamlet just being born. I'm very curious to know more of that, of your maybe discoveries during research.
Yes, I think, well, the most interesting line we found in Hamlet the play as we know it is that the ghost says that he died with sin, which felt like there were things that Hamlet had been suppressed, and I mean the ghost, Hamlet's father, which we refer to as Hamlet, but I know that might be complicated. Hamlet Senior had experienced things during his life, had opinions about things that he had done during his life, but did not necessarily get to express that. There were lots of loose ends. There's the war with Fortinbras, and we know that there is this warrior armor that he wears when he appears as a ghost. So there's a lot about keeping things inside, shielding things, putting on a mask or a front of an armor. Now, obviously, we know that we found out through research, actually, that at the time it wasn't uncommon for the next generation to just divide up land. It was actually a strange choice for Hamlet to be the sole inheritant of Denmark, which means that that was a choice. So he for some reason, did not want his brother to share the country, which means there was something going on between them, whether that was distrust or something else. Yeah. And we looked into Gertrude and the fact that Hamlet does say, you know, that's her character and her journey. That's not for me to, I can't actually comment on that. I don't want to. There's a lot of grief there and a lot of suppressed feelings. So we just felt that there was so much there, and that was not something that had just happened because someone had poisoned him. That must have been a thing that Hamlet Senior had been carrying with him throughout his life. Yeah.
Yeah, I think something that, I mean, Hamlet is probably one of the most well-known pieces of work in Shakespeare. And I think it was something that we found really interesting, that maybe that is because there are so many unanswered questions in it. There is so much space for whether that's a director or an actor to come in and decide what their version of Hamlet is shaped like, that we were really keen to go back to sort of what the seeds of it all and figure out what that might have looked like, especially because, well, one of the lines in Hamlet is sort of describing rot in Elsinore. We were really interested in seeing, okay, well, if that's a recent development, what could Elsinore have looked like before? And there's this interesting thing, I think, especially when you're looking at the paternal line of Hamlet calling his own son Hamlet. That wasn't a normal thing to do either. So there's a lot of ego involved in Hamlet Senior.
And what we found, because those are, like, I think the three main elements: Hamlet being shielded, not wanting Claudius as a shared heir, him calling his son Hamlet, and that we found that Gertrude wasn't Danish.
Yes.
Because the woman that she was based on, as far as and obviously there's imagination added, and we chose to go that path. But for us, deciding that she was Saxon-born, or you know, meant that there was an element of not feeling completely at home, and her name suggests it too. It doesn't feel like it's a particularly Danish name, and I think for her to be slightly more isolated, to feel like an outcast, when there is a universe in which Claudius also feels like an outcast, for them to find each other makes a lot of sense. And I think rather than judging that, we wanted to find what would make it logical for people to come together in different iterations of their life. Yeah.
And in this universe, I'm wondering, where does the Fool fit in, without giving too much away, of course?
I think that the Jester or the Fool was such a general concept in the Middle Ages. Every court would have had, whether that was a natural or a wise fool, depending on. And the fact that they would often be the one person in a court that could speak truth to a ruler, and could sort of propose that maybe the way that they were waging war or the taxes were not doing what the ruler thought they might do, seemed a really pivotal point in Hamlet, because there is so much that is left unsaid in the play. So to have somebody that is capable of saying it and throughout the play discovers his own power in speaking the truth, seemed like a really fun person to put in the middle of a court that likes to not speak about things, and a really interesting exploration of how far you can go without losing either yourself or becoming unsafe.
And I think we looked at a lot of Shakespeare's existing foals to shape Yorick as someone who would live in the same universe but still be an entity of his own. I think the main figures that we looked at were Falstaff and Lear's foal, because the familiarity that we found in that speech where Hamlet says, "Oh, he bore me on his back 1,000 times," there is a sort of childcare situation going on, which means that Yorick must have been well loved within the court and trusted, because you wouldn't let a young child stay with a foal unless you really wanted that person to inspire the upbringing of your prince. And then, so there was something Falstaffy in there, only less
imbued by alcohol.
Yes. Yes. And then looking at Lear's foal and the story of censorship within Elsinore and Elsinore becoming a rotten place, knowing that there is a storyline of finding your own voice as a jester, being a younger jester, growing up beside your king and with your king, and knowing that being a jester is not necessarily a safe thing. Like you said, jesters had different positions, whether in peacetime they could, speak their truth, but in wartime, and since we know that there is this war going on with Fortinbras, their entire position changes and they become the mirror of their king to talk to the other camp's jester and do discussions about battles and sieges and actually be more of a states figure and have no opinion. And it's an interesting balance. And then obviously we know that Yorick dies. Yeah. So there is something that went horribly wrong. And without spoiling the story for you there, I feel like those two elements, the knowing that there is an element of childcare and the story towards free speech, and combining the two were really rich soil to create a character from, I think.
I'm excited to hear more about the dynamic maybe between the young prince and the jester.
I think. Oh, was that a?
I think it's a really interesting thing, because the story starts on the night of Hamlet's birth, and what we know from the text is that Yorick disappears by the time Hamlet is full. So I think what's been really interesting about the dynamic is that it is, for Yorick, really formative, and for Hamlet probably to an extent as well, but I know for myself that I don't recall much from before sort of 3-4 years of age.
It's probably healthy.
Yes, I'd imagine so. So I think usually when you speak about dynamic, you would talk from both perspectives, but I think this dynamic is really interesting for a myriad of reasons, because it is mostly informed by the way that Yorick sees it.
I think there is something, when you're dealing with a child that we only know as a teenager or as a man, and we know that he's prone to depression, and that's possibly, it's interpreted as a result of his family and the fact that his father is gone and that we know that his father has been murdered. I think there was an interesting question for me when you have a jester who is sort of responsible for the emotional state of people and keeping a court well entertained, to combine the two. And I think because Elsinore's rot to us in our interpretation have been going on for a lot longer, to have Hamlet as a baby, we call him an unsmiling child, and for Yorick to be made responsible for his joy and upbringing. I think Hamlet as a character loves storytelling and loves plays and loves
acting.
Well, he loves and the fact that he uses a play when he's most desperate in his own life, and yet we see none of that is seen in Gertrude or in his father. So it must have come from somewhere. And the fact that he, like, when he discovers this skull and is like, oh my God, I remember you. You were fantastic. We played around all of it and we did everything together. And he doesn't say, and I remember when you died. So there's a gap there. And especially when you're that young, it's makes sense for you to be parted from something that big. But then the fact that he doesn't know anything about that is suspicious.
It suggests
at least
a plot.
What, in Denmark?
No, exactly. Well, and that's the thing. We've really tried to trace back that plotting and seeing how those people hadn't just turned manipulative in the end of their lives, but had been, or where that started.
Yeah, I think it's been really, I think, informative. Because I think that there is a lot of things going on in sort of social political life at the moment that has to do with things that started a longer time ago, and at the same time we are at a cusp of potentially things getting a lot worse if we don't navigate certain things with compassion and nuance now. And it's been really interesting to write a piece of work that explores not the final unnuanced sort of opposites of Hamlet, but to see where having a conversation or the possibility of a conversation might have completely changed the outcome that we see in the original play. And of course, I think that was an interesting thing. I think it's a really exciting thing to know an ending and not know how to get there.
Yeah.
And I think by writing it, I definitely realised that there are so many points of intervention, and it's almost a choice to not use them. So then you start seeing that, yes, personally a character might not be able to see something as a solution, but it's also about how the rest of the people around that character facilitate them not going for a certain road, which just feels really current, I think, to me.
Absolutely.
Anyway.
No, I agree.
It sounds like you've had a very interesting writing process with all this documentation and putting puzzle pieces together. I'm a bit curious, as in, how did you dialogue with Shakespeare and the original text? How are you maybe using it, contradicting it? What's your relation to it?
I think it's funny because one of the other pieces of work that we've recently done is documentary theatre, and even though this is not a documentary at all, our process felt vaguely similar. Yeah. Because we wanted to make something that felt informed and didn't necessarily live in a different universe. If anything, it would add other questions. We also didn't want to solve Hamlet as a play. No. We wanted to create something that would inform it differently, but then would impose the questions that you just described about, like, if you're in this preface or in a phase where things can still be changed or aren't as binary as good or bad, those are some powerful questions. And I think in our writing process, we wanted to make sure that we were as informed as possible and then leave all of that at the door and then just go in. I think language was important.
Yes.
We started out
I think we started
using similar rhythms, and I'm just thinking of language as a...
Yeah. I think what we found is that we really were keen that it lived in the universe of Shakespearean language.
Yes.
And the both of us not having English as our first language and also making theatre
especially not Shakespearean English.
No.
Of course.
No, that would have been really cool.
Well, I mean...
and I think it was really important to us that the language remained, at least for the most part, accessible to audiences, because I think that's a major part. My dad is one of those people. He wants to love Shakespeare, but the language is a barrier for him. He just can't always compute what's going on. And I think there's many people that have similar issues with it, just because it is a language from over 400 years ago. And for most of the world, also in a different language entirely than their own. So I quite enjoyed that we had several drafts of the script, and we started in a very sort of making sure that the rhythm felt the same, but not yet using words that felt perhaps more dated or were more...
I think the rule was that if we felt atmospherically lived in a similar universe and we could still instantly feel what the intention of the word was without an actor solving the word for you, because obviously that's something, as a director, a trick I use a lot when I work with original classical text is you inform the line and then obviously it will read a certain way. But I wanted the text to speak for itself. So I think those were our parameters, and in terms of the actual dialogue and the way that we wrote the story, we just sat down behind a laptop with the two of us and just like stayed in the same headspace for about 3 weeks, and then did a draft after that. But I think because there was so much research, it sort of just came out.
I quite enjoyed our plotting phase. Before we sat down to sort of write the text, we sat down and we just, made up all the events that we thought needed to happen. So before we even had the play text as it is, we just had this sort of master document like you would do. Maybe
well, like we did with our documentary. That's why it felt very similar. Anyway.
You told me some of my next questions already, but I do think there's more to dig in there.
Yes.
I'm curious, well, of course, about your opinion on how is Shakespeare and Hamlet political and relevant today?
I think to me we live in a world that becomes more rigid and harsh to, well, we could say characters that are forgotten or people that aren't necessarily put as the norm. I think normativity is something that is deeply distressing to me as an individual, as an artist, as a person who likes and invests in history and in culture. And I think for me as an artist, it's really important to question norms and to make sure that we allow ourselves to think beyond what is already written, which is why writing Yorick is an act of defiance in itself, even though I'm not defying Shakespeare because I appreciate Shakespeare. But to look beyond what is already given, I think, is an act of rebellion in itself. I think we need jesters in this world. And I'm not saying that because it's a funny pun. I'm saying it because I mean it. We need people who are willing to speak up, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it might have repercussions. And I think the question we try and pose is, how can you do that in a way where the jester is still safe?
Yeah.
Because we can't lose the people who are willing to speak up time. And it happens to political figures all over the world, but it also happens to activists, it happens to artists. We are silenced every day. And I think depending on where you are in the world, that danger will be bigger for you. And I think we are very privileged and lucky to live in London and to be able to make art where we know that it won't have direct consequences to our personal lives.
And funnily enough, even in London, I think people are now starting to feel.
Well, we have the rise of some ridiculous political parties who think that identities are in need of boxing or can't exist. Like the normativity that we've seen in the 40s of the last century are reappearing more and more. And even though I'm not pretending that art can save us, I think inspiring people, like jesters do, through art in a way that is still safe for the jester, but not necessarily, well, but does do the trick, is really important.
I think there's also a really interesting thing there about the difference between uncomfortability and safety. Because I think a lot of people think that being uncomfortable means being unsafe. And that is not true. I think that we have grown as a society really comfortable keeping everything to ourselves.
Or staying within our bubbles. Like, it's very easy to find people who just have the same opinions as you and then express how unhappy you are at the state of the world, but you know that that won't result in anything.
And I think as well that I think Shakespeare generally, if you're looking at his work and what it inspires, even just within his own written work, not so much necessarily all the people that then riff off of what that universe is, I think I am excited by the realization that Shakespeare is not necessarily in its base for everyone, and that there is a much more active part in people that work with his work now to make it accessible for people, and to make it something that speaks to everyone potential. Well, of course, if they want to engage with it, but that there is. We are at a point where it's been so long that we've done all the classical work in a way that is expected, and we now get to do it in a way that is unexpected.
Well, and also because I know that there is a lot of people out there who want to do Shakespeare like it's supposed to be done. But Shakespeare was a strange experimental man. Like, the fact that he set his own theatre on fire. And
3 times.
Well, or 2 times, I don't like, but, you know. He wasn't doing a Sophocles at the time. He wasn't doing, he was using elements like we are using elements. And I think it's very exciting to, you know, use what the world gives to you, but turn it into something new. And I think that is that active creation is also something that I want to give to the audience. I think that we actively... we seek out them. Well, that's the thing. We seek out play with the audience as well, because there is creation on both ends. And I think that if you allow people to play and to feel free and to be uncomfortable, because audience participation, let's be real, is really uncomfortable sometimes. But you realize by doing, or through doing, or at least for me, that being uncomfortable and engaging in play is an act of defiance, or is an act of growth, or an act of creation. And that's very exciting to me.
And again, if you're going back to Shakespeare's time, Shakespeare didn't have an audience that sat in the dark and listened very carefully to every single word.
And then went away and was like, "Oh yes, I've been told the truth.
Yes,
this is important."
Like it was opinion making. It was people, you know. And as much as I can understand that maybe crisp packets are annoying in a theatre, and it sort of you know, interrupts a little bit here and there. This sense of freedom that an audience used to have, of being able to express regardless of what the customs were around
and choosing whether or not they want to engage and listen, they can walk away. Like, it's important that we deliver something that starts a conversation, and that it's not something that we put out there as like, well, we've been really clever, because that's pointless. And it's
a bit insufferable, to be honest.
Well, and it's not what the world needs. No. I think if anything, inspiring conversation and play between us, and having the audience be just as important as the artwork, is essential.
Because it doesn't. I could perform this show in an empty room, and it obviously wouldn't do anything. So
it would do something for you.
Well, yeah, but only, you know.
You know, but there's not the point.
Yeah. Like it's. I think that as theatre makers, we have grown very dependent on an audience giving us their attention pretty much for free. The fact
that, I'm very passionate about this, but the fact that you can't choose not to applaud at the end. Obviously you can, but it wouldn't occur to you, because the rule is that you sit and you listen, and then by the end you go, that was fantastic. Whether or not you mean it, there's not the question of me sitting there being like, thanks, and then leaving. And I think we're only at the beginning of figuring out how that works within our practice and within our company. But I think that currently feels like the big question. How can we make sure that it is an active conversation and both parties are equally important? And how can we use Shakespeare in order to achieve that, and the spirit of experiment, and the spirit of madness, and the spirit of jesterhood to do all of that.
Thank you so much for this. This was refreshing to hear.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Our interview is not over. I was just overjoyed by the answer. I'm curious about your audience. Who is your audience?
Well, when we've been to Germany previously for another part of the sort of Shakespeare Festival network, we were really delighted to find that there was a 9-year-old boy in the audience, as well as
who loved it and like got it and was fully engaged in the whole thing.
And his
younger brother, I think, fell asleep. So we need to be like
and a 7-year-old German boy is absolutely able to fall asleep.
Of course.
In a very sort of English Shakespearean world. But it was really, I think, for us, exciting to see that we had a broad range of people coming to see it. And I think that is one of the things that makes Shakespeare a playwright that we still perform. It's because there is something for everybody in age range. And I think that's something that we'd like to continue to invite.
I think there's something about the premise of this where you know that you're going to be watching a story you vaguely have heard of, that invites people who are curious and people who have accepted that they are willing to listen to something they don't know yet. So I feel like regardless of age or background, I feel like the common denominator within our audience is that it's people who are willing to play and who are willing to listen and who are willing to participate in collective imagination. Because that's the thing, like we don't present, like you're playing about 700 characters. You have to do work as an audience member to help us imagine this world. And that's where the audience participation also comes in. We need help to build this imaginative world. So I feel like by the premise of that, it's always people who have a curiosity. And that's very exciting.
And I think it's people that, or at least I hope that it's also people that want to contribute in some way. And I think that that's the exciting thing, because I'd love to get people in that maybe feel unsure about if they want to contribute or how that would work. Yeah. Because I'd love to be in, I as a person would love to be in an audience where there is a couple of people that sort of really know that they're like, if there's audience participation, I'm going to do it. And I want people in the audience to go,
don't look at me. Never look at me.
Oh my God. Because I think that society is made out of lots of different degrees of people that want to put themselves out there. And I think as a society, it's really good to know that you'll never know what's going to happen by saying yes.
And you'll never remain unseen. And I think that is not necessary.
I can see everybody.
No. And I don't mean that in a scary way. I mean that as in, you are here, and so we want to tell you a story. But for us to tell you a story, we need to make sure that you see us and we see you.
Yes.
Yep. That's an answer.
So aside from co-writing the text we're going to see tonight, you are the director of it and you the performer. Yes. I'm very curious about your process of collaboration in both text and show.
I think because we know each other really well and because we wrote this text together, as a director, I don't really believe in hierarchy of me telling you where to stand and what to do. I think I really value collaborative imagination and collective imagination. And I think because we wrote it together and because it so much lived within both of our brains, I felt like my responsibility as a director was making sure that I could hold you whilst you were doing all of these characters and receiving all of that, rather than me imposing how it should be done, because I feel like we both, if anything, it feels like we co-created it, which we did. And I think that goes for most of, if not all of our work.
I think there was something really, I think there's something really lovely about having a character or multiple characters that even if you're still exploring and always finding new things, and there is a massive difference between writing something and then acting it, but because you understand the thoughts behind it, because I think that's something that,
because they came from you.
Well, yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of actors usually, it's the other way around. You've got the text, and then you have to find the thoughts so that you're not just reading things aloud. And doing that in a space where we both knew that we were, we both knew as much as we would know. There wasn't another authority or another book that could tell us more. It felt really free and it was just really fun, I think, and really playful. And I think that's something that I think works really well with us as collaborators, is that we are quite good at removing stress from the room.
Yes, and I think
for as far as possible. There were definitely moments where I was sitting in a corner, sort of like.
Well, so that's part of the creative process, and I think if you're doing a one-person show and you're doing several characters, it's bound to feel like a big task. That's why I said, like, my job was for me to create a space where both of us would feel like that was a possibility. I think lots of it just flowed very intuitively. I think that's when you know that a collaboration works really well, because we have our separate brains and then we have our sort of collective brain, we joke. But it really does feel that way. And I think that collective brain is something that we want to give to the audience as well, so that they can latch onto it and add to it.
Lastly, because our time is shortly coming to an end, I would like to ask you more about your company, Greensleeved. If you'd like to tell me about your mission.
I think Greensleeved for me, it's still young. I think it was birthed about a year ago when I did Leerlijk, which was my first Shakespearean adaptation, reimagination situation, which I'm still very fond of, I think. Greensleeved appeared as a larger mission to do several things. One, engage the audience in a way that isn't passive. I don't want people to sit in the dark and feel like they're spoon-fed a story or meaning. I feel like theatre is a collaborative act between you and me, where we both see each other and we work on something together.
Very divisively, that's what film is for. Film is a finished product. Theatre is never meant to be.
Well, you read a book and then that, you know, but and that has its place and it's lovely. But I feel because theatre is such a sensory art, there is a collaboration there. Secondly, I wanted to be exploring things that aren't the norm, but working with the norm to show that things that live outside the norm aren't necessarily alien to it. So we live in a Shakespearean world that is well respected within the world of theatre. We know Yorick's name, most of us do. And yet there is a story there that needs to be told to show that people and themes that live outside of the expected are very much present and can inform us. Thirdly, I want to do it in a way where people with all sorts of brains can come together and work on things. I'm a neurodivergent creative. I think it's important to adapt spaces to different types of brains and different types of creative processes. I think it's important to work with people who have brains that are different from you, because your audience will have a myriad of brains. And that goes for the accessibility of the work as well. When I deliver it to an audience, it is important that it comes in different shapes and sizes and that it can adapt to suit different needs. And I think those three things, accessibility, telling unseen and unheard stories in different perspectives that live outside the norm but aren't alien to the norm, and God, what did I say first? Where did I start? I should have remembered that.
That's okay. You started with the audience and...
Yes, exactly. Finding a shape in which there is no hierarchy, but we work collaboratively to have play as an essential act of rebellion. I think those are the three pillars. And then I found you, and we were like, oh, great. And now there's the two of us, and there's other people like Ruth, our fantastic designer. And I think that's a great place to start, and we'll hopefully be doing it for a very long time.
It has been lovely talking to you. Good luck on your performance tonight, and thank you for sharing your thoughts here today. I will be switching back to Romanian to...
Absolutely.
Fantastic, thank you so much.
Thank you. Cu acest interviu se termină seria de interviuri pe care le-am coordonat eu la Interviurile Teatrul Azi la Festivalul Shakespeare din Craiova. Colegii mei vor fi alături de dumneavoastră astăzi de la ora 12:30 și de la 15:30, dar și mâine cu același program orar. Mulțumesc și o zi frumoasă! La revedere!